Hey everyone, this topic is going to be on research strategy. It's going to be where we uh, left off when we actually went through and looked at the ways by which you want to begin conducting and evaluating research. And in this tutorial, we're actually going to have an example of a basic bibliography. So what the book does in these sections that I've highlighted here in this outline is go through and instruct you on first, the reminder to make sure you do a researchable question. That's obviously something that you want to pose a question and then have an argument, which is going to be your thesis. The other basic strategy is pretty straightforward. The idea that you want to balance between primary and secondary sources. You also want to keep an open mind when you are going through reading, especially the sources and the secondary sources. If you have someone that you might disagree with when you're trying to argue a thesis, it's not really the best thing to just say, hey, I'm just going to go and ignore that particular source. You do want to include it, and you can evaluate it on your own. You're going to become versed and you're going to become an expert in this topic that you are going through, and that's something to keep in mind. So when you do come across counter evidence, a source that answers your question, but maybe doesn't come to the same conclusions that you do, it's okay. You can put that in there. Anyone who's doing actual research and is worth anything as a researcher also wants to consider that. And you do it in a way that says, look, my conclusions are a little bit different. So when you're investigating that topic, and some of you have some, again, pretty ambitious topics, that's what you want to consider. I always start with, and not all of you may be on campus, but you can at least get to a library. When you want to get started, you want to, of course, look for the generalized sources, the different encyclopedias on maybe some of the topics. But I would just put the books in your hand. That's always a good thing. The internet is great, and you can do the research that way, but it's not going to solve all of the issues with how to do and conduct good hands-on research. The internet and the book goes through this. The library stacks are where the books are stored. And again, this is almost stressing an obvious point. But if you want to look at picking a book up off the shelf, looking at the bibliography, looking at the footnotes, looking at books on either side of that title, and by the way, all of these different internet catalogs, even for our library here on campus, are not perfect. They might miss books. So nothing replaces going to the actual library. And I will encourage you once again. Now, if you are not on campus, you can do this because I've given you all their information for our great librarians and their ability to help you. You should attempt to schedule a consult with one of the library faculty. We've got 4 of them that I placed there in the resources for our class. Their specialties are everything from archives to the collections of the books to the serials media, where we have, again, the journals. We have physical journals in our library, so some of the older ones you want to put in front of you, but most of them have been thankfully digitized, as I showed you in that last tutorial with looking at JSTOR. But if you want basic information on how to do a search and how to sort through the searches when you use these large, nationally known, again, different databases, I would recommend you talk to one of those folks. They're very approachable, and this is their job. Their job is to help you find the resources, not to narrow down your topic, not to hone your writing skills. That's not what they do. If you cannot make it, you should try to email them. And that's what they're used to dealing with. This is the way we do things at Northwestern. We've got face-to-face and we've got online students. So please take advantage of that. I just encourage that. It's going to help you, even if it's a simple question of, I need some books that are not in our own library, and I need for you to show me how to use interlibrary loan. And they can be very helpful with that. Again, your paper will be graded on obviously the writing and the research. If you're leaving books off that I'm familiar with and they should be in your bibliography. That's not good. So you want to be as thorough as possible. Again, you can research all semester long, but you have to, again, switch over and devote time to writing, and that's understood. And your paper will not be the definitive work on this particular topic, but you want to conduct a pretty exhaustive search. And if you don't see it at our library or can't access it through our database, that should not be where you stop. You keep looking. I also put here, again, on conducting research, once you go through the stacks, they have some information in the book on how to do keyword searches and how to use some of the databases. And again, if you need more help with that, again, please contact, again, someone at your own library, or if you're here on campus, you can take the time and do that. We are not a Research One library here. We have a good amount of resources, but we don't have the same amount as LSU or University of Alabama, or these much larger institutions where there's a lot more graduate school work done. So that shouldn't, again, slow you down from the ability to try to find these sources, whether it be a dissertation on a certain topic that you're doing, whether it be on journals. Journals are all, for the most part, digitized. Primary sources are digitized. It's easier than ever. It's also easy to fall into the trap of using things like Wikipedia, which the book and I will warn you about. You should avoid it. They're not edited, they're not refereed, and it's not like saying, look, I got this off Wikipedia. This is the definitive answer on the Indian nations in Louisiana before the Louisiana Purchase. Well, we've got a lot of sources that would be much better than that. They are, again, refereed. Refereed journal means that a group of individuals looked at a particular article entry and said that the research was done to academic standards. And that's why these things usually show up that way in journals. You don't have the same criteria for Wikipedia. So putting your topic in that database or just plugging it into the internet is just filled with problems. Also, if any of you are going to do interviews, they are counted as primary sources, so that's something to keep in mind. I don't know if that will be an issue that any of you come across. So the book gives you some basic sources you could use, the big picture sources, the encyclopedias, and then by which you go from there and begin to narrow down your topics. It also gives you a guide on how to find certain sources in some of these databases that you'll be using, that you'll be linking to. And all the ones that are related to history are right there on the LibGuides that are linked in our course shell. Okay, so I think that's everything I want to say about that. The basic guides to internet search engines are there. There's also a method by which you're going to begin to start to think about drafting your bibliography. So there is a working bibliography in the textbook, and I have that up here. It's on pages 180 to 182, and I'm going to flip to that real quickly because in my copy of the book, it's got a basic sampling of books, of articles, any documents. There's more than one way to format a bibliography, and what I'd also like to do is show you Damn, I don't know why that does that. Okay, so here's an example of a bibliography that I'm familiar with. This is excerpts from my doctoral dissertation, and I used it because it's got a little bit of everything. Chances are you're not going to be using manuscript or unpublished documents unless some of you are going to do research in our archives here on campus. So for the most part, but I wanted to put that example up there as well. Now, let's talk about the basic form of a bibliography. You're going to start out with your primary sources. And primary sources, if you don't have any manuscript collections or anything like that, it's fine. You'll probably just get rid of those. And this will be essentially primary sources. You can just do it that way. These are the published sources. Again, these are those that you can actually find and are printed and are published. Whoops. So you'll have it broken down this way in a bibliography. You'll have your primary sources, Now, primary sources, and I should say bibliography sources, are alphabetized by the author, and there you have it right there. And so you can see it all through here. A through Z, organized, and I want to show you a couple of examples. This is published. This is the life and writings of Jared Sparks. It was a primary source I used. Here are some territorial papers. So this is a published. It'll be in book form. In fact, we carry these at the actual library. And so what you'll see here is a bound version of territorial papers. And you might think, oh, they're just loose papers. Well, they are, but they've actually been put in a collection. So that is a primary source. It's accessible. They were all put together, different volumes, going back to the 1930s. So we've got some primary sources here. We've also got secondary sources. I wanted to show you this for a couple of reasons. Number one, they're all obviously alphabetized. If you have the same author more than once, you can see right here, it's the same author and two different books by that author. Again, it follows that alphabetical rule. I also want to show you, and this is in the book, but it's also important to see an actual example. So this is what it will look like in your bibliography at the end of your paper. You've also got right here a particular book chapter. Some of you might pick up books on certain subjects and you want to only use a chapter of that book. So you've got one author. He wrote about Nathaniel Greene, a Revolutionary War general, and this is his article, his chapter, we might say, inside a book edited by someone else. So I chose that particular example to show you when I was putting this together from the larger bibliography. Also, you have a section that might say either periodicals or journals. Either one is fine, but you can put that under a separate heading. So it's primary sources, secondary sources, and if you have interviews, you can put that in there as well. That will all be in the larger example that's actually in the textbook. So these are done the same way, but you have to keep in mind that the citation method has to be correct. You have certain information that you put in a bibliography. You've got the title in italics, the publication place, the publication press that does it, and the year. Notice you don't put page numbers. That's in a footnote and an endnote. You would only put page numbers because when you have a journal. So this, out of the North Carolina Booklet Journal, was published in 1902, and these are the pages where this particular journal, Whigs and Tories, page 3 to page 23. And that's how you cite it. Again, it's a little bit different. The guide for how to do it is right past the bibliography. I'll point out that right after the bibliography, when we get to chapter 10 in the textbook, page 183, you'll see on the side of your book, there are some pages that are gray at the very edge there. Those are the proper citation methods for a bibliography, for endnotes and footnotes of different sources. And we'll get the difference between a bibliography and an endnote or footnote later on when we get to documenting the actual paper. But when you open that section, it will tell you all the different ways you document a bibliography entry based on if you have, again, more than one author, if it's a letter, if it's a journal article, and all the different ways you need to do it. That has to be done correctly. That's part of the proper way to do the paper. So because this is the next assignment, I wanted to make sure you're familiar with that. Now you see a working bibliography. Now you know how and what type of information you have to put up. A working bibliography is one that may change. I'm not going to hold up your draft of your bibliography in February and say, look, it doesn't look like the one you turned in April. So know that this bibliography may change from its first draft to its second, but I wanted to show you how to do the proper citation methods for the bibliography. So this is what you need to get going now. I mean, you've already gotten your topic. We've gone back and forth for some of you with narrowing down your topic. Now that you know the scope of your paper, you want to start finding the sources, evaluating what sources will work for you without having to necessarily read the whole book, and then how to do some basic searches. So from there, you need to start putting together your bibliography. And that's the next assignment due on the 12th of February. Again, any problems or concerns, please don't hesitate to email me. But in the meantime, get to the research.